Wherever you are in the world, welcome to another edition of Jerry's Take on China. And please don't forget to like and share this video. I'd really love this message to reach more eyes and ears, and it does when you like and share. Sometimes I follow people, and I'm sure people follow me too, for an opposing point of view. That doesn't mean we need to be rude to each other just because we disagree. But quite often, if I think someone is wrong, I'll make a comment or ask a question which I think exposes the point that I disagree with. And I expect there are people who do the same to me. However, it's what happens next that really makes us different. There are a variety of reactions. Some will just call me a liar. Some say I must be paid. Some refuse to read any link that I send them. And those who do refuse to read, analyze, or critically question what is said to them are very definitely the brainwashed ones. They don't want to know the truth. They only want their version of the truth. The others are the ones I want to reach. They are more open-minded. They'll question further, often with the line, "But what about this?" or "What about that?" And when they do, I know I'm on a winner. These are genuine people asking genuine questions because they've been hoodwinked into believing China is something that it isn't. And it is challenging their senses. How do I know this? Because I was once one of them myself. When everything we read about China is bad, how can one person be right? I've even got friends here in China who think I'm on the wrong side. They love China, they love the people, they love the food and their travels, and they sincerely believe the government is bad. Sometimes they love their jobs, but more often I find they're quite unhappy in their jobs. And this is what creates this bleak environment for them. I saw this photograph on Twitter. I don't know who to credit it to, but it encapsulates exactly how I, and a few others that I know, feel about China. You're all wrong. Even after coming to China and seeing for myself, Western media still influenced my thinking. I would read an article in Time magazine, for example, comparing Xi Jinping to Mao, both being dictators, and I would agree with it. And then I learned, how did Xi get to his position and what he's done since he's been there? I read some of his early speeches. I invested in his books in English, thanks to the brilliant David Ferguson. And now I know better. Everything he does for the people of China. Now, if you don't believe me, read his books and look at what's been achieved during his tenure. It's exactly what he said he would do. I would see an article maybe showing how Xi Jinping has purged his opponents, and I'd agree with it. He's stamping out corruption, but only in his enemies. But slowly, that perception started to change, and I realized he wasn't purging enemies. If they actually are his enemies, it's because he was purging them, and then they became so. Most Chinese people who have left China for a new life elsewhere are good people. I know many of them. But there are some people who left China for different reasons. And if you ask Chinese people in China, you'll get a very different perception on Xi Jinping to than when you ask people who are overseas Chinese. And the reason for that is simple. Many of them haven't set foot in China during Xi Jinping's era, or maybe it's because he made their life in China difficult. Some people, believe it or not, don't like Xi Jinping because he didn't just stamp out corruption, he stamped out their corruption. And they're the ones we see in the media. For the record, he also did the same to some foreigners by introducing rules that stated we couldn't remain in China if we had a police record in our own country, or we couldn't work in China if we don't have a university degree and the appropriate other qualifications for the job that we're doing. Most foreigners left China during that period, 2016-2017, are now the people who are calling me a liar. And they're making a very good living, actually telling lies about the country that made it impossible for them to remain on the gravy train. If you follow someone on YouTube or Twitter or any other social media who makes a living disparaging China, ask them when they left and what were their reasons. Many of them left 2016 and 2017, but I'm sure they won't tell you the reason truthfully. Whereas if you follow people who are still in China, you know they are qualified to be here, they have no criminal record, and it's really up to you to decide which one you believe. Now, China's growth isn't about statistics. It's about so much more. Imagine working in a factory where there are only 3 cars parked outside for several years. The boss, the financial controller, and the operations manager. Then suddenly, one day, the sales manager arrives and he's got a new car. After a few months, some of the accountants and 1 or 2 of the sales and operational supervisors have cars. Fast forward 10 years later, the factory needs to rent space for a car park because there are 250 people working there and over 200 cars looking for parking every morning. This is the reality of China and the truth of a factory where I worked for 3 years as a training manager. And it's examples like this, which are all over China, that cause people to think something is different here. It's very different from my expectations. China has shown exceptional and continued growth through every single market problem in the last 50 years. It has come from the bottom 5 economies to the top 2 and is on target to become the number 1. This is phenomenal success. In becoming number 2, it has invested in roads, trains, port, trade. They've built the economy further and further. The country has lifted 800 million people from absolute poverty to a place of hope. Not yet rich, but at least aspiring to become more comfortable. Every single life in China today, except for the criminal, is better than it was for their parents and appears to be on target to be better for the next generation. Because hundreds of new hospitals, aged care centers, universities, schools, and colleges have been built. The per capita GDP is 1/5 of that of the USA. And this is true because the population is 4 times more. And China is still in the building process. Remember, until 70 years ago, China was a corrupt and divided place with an internal war going on. From 70 years ago to 50 years ago, it was sanctioned by the international community and unable to trade with the world. So this growth that we see here is only the last 50 years. What will the next 50 years bring? The most important thing, however, is not per capita GDP. It's called PPP. And Chinese people are actually better off than Americans in most aspects. Think about who has most of the money in the USA. One family, the Waltons. They own Walmart, but have more than $1 trillion in assets. Bezos, Musk, Gates, and a handful of others have more than $1 trillion more. The money in the US may be higher per capita, but the people of the US generally live in debt to their credit cards, their car loans, and their mortgages. In China, although many people do borrow money, a great number of them borrow from family, and they buy apartments or cars, usually for cash. These people are much better off in times of crisis than people who have borrowed for their lifestyle. A rich-looking house in the USA might not be as rich as it looks. They could have several bank loans. They could have 1 month's loss of income, could render them, if not homeless, certainly in a very difficult position. And that's the truth of the USA. It's possible there are some people such as this in China, but the numbers of them would be considerably smaller. Buy now, pay later loans, paycheck loans, week-to-week loans. These are common ways for people to survive in the West, but almost unheard of in China. Most ordinary Chinese people use WeChat wallet or cash to pay for everything. The number of credit cards in China has increased. but it's still only around 750 million cards, or 47% of the population. It's probably less than that, as richer people would probably have more than one card, while in the US, the banks have issued more credit cards than there are people, 370 million. This so-called real estate crisis that's hurt China's economy, but Evergrande collapsed almost 3 years ago, and the economy is still growing. Because it's resilient, it didn't rely on one sector for growth, as all the experts suggested. It will diversify its markets even further while still growing through this so-called trade war, where trade has actually grown with every country that it deals with. This isn't a country in crisis. This is a country facing challenges responsibly. However, if someone can look at all the statistics on the USA's crime, drugs, health, education, poverty, prison population, if you can view videos of street scenes that come from horror movies and watch supermarket shopping that comes from some dystopian post-apocalypse scene and still say the US is the greatest place on earth, then that's fine for you. There isn't much I can do to help. For people who think that China is going to collapse, and they are stupid enough to keep believing it despite how many predictions they've read. A few comments on the reply section of a YouTube video won't cure their ignorance, their racism, or their stupidity. But answering genuine questions with honesty and experience is likely to cure misinformed, critical thinkers. And thankfully, it seems most of my viewers are exactly that. So thank you all once again for watching Jerry's Take on China with a critical and open mind. And I'll see you next time. Bye for now.